Democratic senator now says you can add the entire Intelligence Committee to the list. Dick Durbin of Illinois making the amazing claim on the floor of the Senate that while he and perhaps the 16 other members of that Intelligence Committee knew the administration was misleading the American public, he, perhaps they, kept quiet about it because due to his position on the committee, he had been sworn to secrecy.
A few hundred feet away from here, in a closed room, carefully guarded, the Intelligence Committee was meeting on a daily basis for top secret briefings about the information we were receiving, and the information we had in the Intelligence Committee was not the same information being given to the American people. I couldn't believe it. Members of this administration were in active, heated debate over whether aluminum tubes really meant that the Iraqis were developing nuclear weapons. Some within the administration saying, of course not. It's not the same kind of aluminum tube. At the same time that members of the administration were telling the American people to be fearful of mushroom-shaped clouds. I was angry about it. Frankly, I couldn't do much about it. Because you see, in the Intelligence Committee, we're sworn to secrecy. We can't walk outside the door and say, the statement made yesterday by the White House is in direct contradiction to classified information that's being given to this Congress. We can't do that. We couldn't make those statements. And so in my frustration, I sat here on the floor of the Senate and listened to this heated debate about invading Iraq, thinking the American people are being misled. They are not being told the truth.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
I'm not down, dude. I tell you what. Shit! We need to get the fuck out of here.
Nope, no weapons over there. Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here. Oops, this photo wasn't supposed to be in here. This is a skull and bone secret signal. This is a skull and bone secret signal. This is a skull and bone secret signal. This is a skull and bone secret signal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A number of years ago, I heard a young father, a very prominent young man in the entertainment world, addressing a tremendous gathering in California. It was during the time of the Cold War, and communism and our own way of life were very much on people's minds, and he was speaking to that subject. And suddenly, though, I heard him saying, "I love my little girls more than anything," and I said to myself, "Oh no, don't say that." But I had underestimated him. He went on, "I would rather see my little girls die now, still believing in God, than have them grow up under communism and one day die no longer believing in God." There were people in that audience. They came to their feet with shouts of joy. They had instantly recognized the profound truth in what he had said with regard to the physical and the soul and what was truly important. Yes, let us pray for the salvation of all of those who live in that totalitarian darkness. Pray they will discover the joy of knowing God. But until they do, let us be aware that while they preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth, they are the focus of evil in the modern world. It was C.S. Lewis who, in his unforgettable Screwtape letters, wrote, "The greatest evil is not done now in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint. It is not even done in concentration camps and labor camps. In those we see its final result. But it is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried, and minuted in clear, carpeted, warmed, and well-lighted offices by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voice." Well, because these quiet men do not raise their voices, because they sometimes speak in soothing tones of brotherhood and peace, because like other dictators before them, they're always making their final territorial demand, some would have us accept them at their word and accommodate ourselves to their aggressive impulses. But if history teaches anything, it teaches that simple-minded appeasement or wishful thinking about our adversaries is folly. It means the betrayal of our past, the squandering of our freedom. So I urge you to speak out against those who would place the United States in a position of military and moral inferiority. You know, I've always believed that old Screwtape reserved his best efforts for those of you in the church. So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I'm going to try doing something this evening, and this is going to be difficult because I'm going to try to explain something that's been annoying, and then I'm concerned that what I'm learning is actually really dangerous to our society. And then we're going to walk through some of the latest budget numbers. Look, if you don't have a life and you're someone that watches C-SPAN, you've had to deal with me once a week coming up here and functionally doing economic lectures. And I don't mean to sound like a jerk. I'm just trying to make it so there's an understanding of the actual fiscal situation we are facing as a country. And a couple of weeks ago, I did one, and boom. I didn't believe there was this many people that don't have a life on YouTube, but it has like 960,000 views. And I've been blessed. This has happened multiple times over the last couple of years. And then I made a mistake. I actually looked at some of the comments started a couple of years ago, and you're going, well, that's not true. Well, that has to be a robot. Well, that's a bot. Well, that's completely. Well, why is that one written in horrible English? So we actually started a little project in our office a couple months ago, trying to understand what is the foreign infiltration into our ability to communicate in our society. How many bad actors are basically filling up this thing with crap, with things that are completely not true? And it turned out we found academic article after academic article, Microsoft doing huge data analytics, all sorts of things out there that in many ways we're at war. We don't actually understand it, but we have a war going on, and it's a war for hearts and minds. And there are bad actors around this world. The number of data points we have here showing particularly China, Russia, Iran, and it's getting weaponized at a level I don't think any of us are intellectually ready for, because AI is here, the plain language is here, and they're moving off of just your Facebook page or your social media accounts. It is moving into now fake text messages, all sorts of other ways where they're going to try to pollute and take down the West. And we are not the only ones. We have map after map of what China just did to Taiwan. Now, Taiwan actually has built a policy on how to help combat it. They get attacked on social media with fake stuff. They have teams that turn around and say, okay, here's what they said, here's the documents, look it up yourself. I don't think we're ready for this. How do you and I and our brothers and sisters on the left and anyone that actually cares about this country, how do you have honest debates, honest discussions about in my case, I'm fearful of the crushing debt. We're going to walk through that. But other policy things, when you actually lay out facts, you lay out the information of what's going on, and 90 seconds later, there's a bot that basically is putting out absolute crap. How do you hold a society together? Well, you can't even agree on the baseline facts to build the debate from, when article after article, and some of these are huge. I brought these are the executive summaries. I mean, some of the ones we've gone through are hundreds of pages of tracking entire troll farms. There's one document here saying that China may be spending multiple billions of dollars in influence operations here in this country to basically distort reality. And the point I'm going at right now, this seems like a weird place to go for a guy that wants to talk about the numbers of what's happening in our government. I'm incredibly frustrated because I do not know how we have an honest debate when we have a disinformation wave coming at us from functionally government.
When Morpheus holds up the battery and he says, "We are the energy," And when I first saw The Matrix, I had no idea what he was talking about. I now have a much better idea what Morpheus was saying. What we energy for at this stage is open to interpretation. But what I do know, more than anything I've ever held dear, is that everything we've been taught is a lie.
Don't let them control you. They will indoctrinate you. Don't believe their lies. It's all bullshit. Everything you believe is a lie. Just control who you believe. Open your mind. Don't let them control you. They will indoctrinate you. Don't believe their lies. It's all bullshit.
Sudosi budosi naranjanasi samsara maya pariyajitisi samsara svavanam jajamohadnijam najanam mrityur traisat svarupi Sudosi budosi naranjanasi samsara maya pariyajitisi samsara svavanam jajamohadnijam najanam mrityur traisat svarupi Sudosi budosi naranjanasi samsara maya pariyajitisi samsara svavanam jajamohadnijam najanam mrityur traisat svarupi Sudosi budosi naranjanasi samsara maya pariyajitisi samsara svavanam jajamohadnijam najanam mrityur traisat svarupi You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. Sudo se budo se naranjana se samsara maya pariyajitesi samsara svapanam traja moha nidram najanma mrityur trisatvarupi. Sudo se budo se naranjana se samsara maya pariyajitesi samsara svapanam traja moha nidram najanma mrityur trisatvarupi. Sudo se budo se naranjana se samsara maya pariyajitesi samsara svapanam traja moha nidram najanma mrityur trisatvarupi. You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. Sudo se budo se naranjana se samsara maya pariyajitesi samsara svapanam traja moha nidram najanma mrityur trisatvarupi. Sudo se budo se naranjana se samsara maya pariyajitesi samsara svapanam traja moha nidram najanma mrityur trisatvarupi. Sudo se budo se naranjana se samsara maya pariyajitesi samsara svapanam traja moha nidram najanma mrityur trisatvarupi.
So Greetings, everybody. This is Shay Bernhardt, manager at the Brooklyn Station LLC, brooklynstation.com, and kingandqueenradio.com. This is a special re-recording of episode 1 of Preceding Clarity. I'm redoing it because there were some issues with the first episode, so I'm redoing it without them. Woohoo! Alright, so there's another reason why I'm redoing this, because this is basically a 2-episode type of transmission or broadcast, where the first episode is a rereading of the top secret leaked document, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, which is officially called Operations Research Technical Manual TW-SW7905.1. This was found in 1979 jammed in a Z-Box that was purchased at a Boeing surplus sale. And for the next episode, we will actually be discussing Boeing for a minute. Or actually, I'll be showing you Boeing's CEO and the president of Boeing and his appearance before Congress recently. If you don't know, they did plead guilty to felony crimes, but they're not really getting punished for it because they're part of this organization. The meeting spoken of in this paper is actually the Bilderberg meeting, and in the next episode I will be kind enough to, while I'm doing a reading about Babel, which is really where all of this started, I will be also providing a list of those in this group, as well as, if I can, the Trilateral Commission, which is another part of it, which is kind of the inner core of it. These connect to the International Monetary Fund, is directly owned and controlled by the Federal Reserve System of both America and Europe, and explains actually a lot of what's going on right now as far as the economic conflict. I can say that next week's new episode is going to start digging into the monetary system and the inherent flaws in that make it so that it's basically built to collapse, and then once it collapses, you get, as they put it in this paper, benevolent genocide and war in order to reset the system. What I'm going to discuss when we get into that, of course, is the fact that it's a completely unnecessary system, and that it's actually created specifically to meet the tactics that this paper discusses. There's also another paper written by, I would say, the same people years later, that's circulating in the Chinese government, that's basically says the same thing and worded very similar. Now, we're not going to read that, but I am going to provide information regarding that particular piece of that document, should anybody want to do their own research, which I highly recommend. Don't take my word for anything, because it's just wise not to believe anything you hear these days, and if you believe half of what you see, you're still fooling yourself. So I highly recommend doing your own research. And along that lines, keep in mind that the opinions and views expressed here are not the opinions and views of Brooklyn Station LLC or any of its advertisers or anybody else associated with it. They're merely my perspective on the research I've done, and they are provided for pure entertainment purposes. So basically, take what you need, store the rest away just in case you might need it later, and let's get this going, because I got a lot to cover here. Alright, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna end up showing you this as I read it on a screen share, so you can read along with me. I read kind of quick, and we got a lot of territory to cover, so bear with me here. Alright, so We will begin. Welcome aboard. This publication marks the 25th anniversary of the Third World War, called the Quiet War, being conducted using subjective biological warfare, although personally I use the word neurological or psychological warfare, fought with silent weapons. This pamphlet contains an introductory description of this war, its strategies, and its weaponry. May 1974, number 74-1120. Security. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e., the engineering of a social automation system, silent weapons, on a national or worldwide scale, without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e., slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of such intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny, otherwise it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic warfare. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodologies for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between the person or group of persons and the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no agonizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without the loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them, which is basically a flap your lips and die warning. Historical introduction. Silent weapon technology has evolved from operations research, a strategic and tactical methodology developed under the military management in England during World War II. The original purpose of operations research was to study the strategic and tactical problems of air and land defense with the objective of effective use of limited military resources against foreign enemies, i.e., logistics. It was soon recognized by those in positions of power that the same methods might be useful for totally controlling a society, but better tools were necessary. Social engineering, the analysis and automation of a society, requires the correlation of great amounts of constantly changing economic information, i.e., data. Relay computers were too slow, but the electronic computer, invented in 1946 by J. Presper Ecker and John W. Moshley, filled the bill. The next breakthrough was the development of the simplest method of linear programming in 1947 by the mathematician George B. Dantzig. Then in 1948, the transistor, invented by J. Bardeen, W. H. Bratton, and W. Shockley, promised great expansion of the computer field by reducing space and power requirements. Alright, so that's 1948. Think about today, especially considering AI, the primary owners of the large language models have actually joined this group that includes OpenAI. Google's always been part of it anyway, and what's the other one? Well, we'll get to that. Alright, with these inventions under their direction, those in positions of power strongly suspected that it was possible for them to control the whole world with the push of a button. Immediately, the Rockefeller Foundation got in on the ground floor by making a 4-year grant to Harvard College, funding the Harvard Economic Research Product for the study of the structure of the American economy. 1 year later, in 1949, the United States Air Force joined in. In 1952, the grant period terminated, and a high-level meeting of the elite was held to determine the next phase of social operations research. That would be the meeting, aka otherwise known as the Bilderberg meeting, which has happened every year since then. We will, of course, show you a list of the participants, just so you know who wrote this paper or is otherwise supporting the tactics that it discusses. The Harvard project had been very fruitful, as is borne out by the publication of some of its results in 1953, suggesting the feasibility of economic, i.e. social engineering. Engineered in the last half of the decade of the 1940s, the new Quiet War machine stood, so to speak, in sparkling gold-plated hardware on the showroom floor, ready to roll by 1954. With the creation of the Maser in 1954, the promise of unlocking unlimited sources of fusion atomic energy, which they finally have figured out how to do, from the heavy hydrogen in seawater and the consequent availability of unlimited social power, was a possibility only decades away. The combination was irresistible. The Quiet War was quietly declared by the international elite at the first Bilderberg meeting held in 1954. Although the silent weapon system was nearly exposed 13 years later, the evolution of the new weapon system has never suffered any major setbacks. This volume marks the 25th anniversary of the beginning of the Quiet War. Already this domestic war has had many victories on many fronts throughout the world and cost many, 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 many their lives. And that is my ad-lib. In 1954, it was well recognized by those in positions of authority that it was only a matter of time, only a few decades, before the general public would be able to grasp and upset the cradle of power. For the very elements of the new silent weapon technology were as accessible for a public utopia as they were for providing a private utopia. The issue of primary concern, that of dominance, revolved around the subject of the energy sciences. No surprise there, right? Energy. Energy is recognized to the key of all activity on Earth. Natural science is the study of the sources and control of natural energy, and the social science, theoretically expressed as economics, is the study of the sources and control of social energy. Both are bookkeeping systems, mathematics. Therefore, mathematics is the primary energy science, and the bookkeeper can be king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of the bookkeeping. Alright, so, and as far as esoterics and your higher sciences are concerned, mathematics and geometry figure heavily into an understanding of the higher sciences. So they're not BSing here, you know. So alright. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge, the end is control. Beyond this remains only one issue. Who will be the beneficiary? It's a big fucking club, folks, and we're not in it. In 1954, this was the issue of primary concern. Although the so-called moral issues were raised, in view of the law of natural selection, it was agreed that a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent. Consequently, in the interest of future world order, peace, and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with the ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural and social energy, i.e. wealth, of the undisciplined and irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, secure, and apply new weapons, which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principle of operation and public appearances as to earn for themselves the name silent weapons. In conclusion, the objective of economic research, as conducted by the magnates of capital and banking and the industries of commodities, goods, and services, is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and manipulatable. In order to achieve a totally predictive economy, the low-class elements of society must be brought under total control, i.e., must be housebroken, trained, and assigned a yoke and long-term social duties from an early age before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the manner. In order to achieve such conformity, the lower class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the mode of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower class individuals have little, if any, hope of extracting themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintain some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class. Alright, so let's read that again. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of society must be brought under total control, i.e., they must be housebroken, trained, and assigned a yoke and long-term social duties from a very early age, before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the matter. In order to achieve such conformity, the lower class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of the increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the mode of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintain some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class. Descriptive introduction of the silent weapon. Everything that is expected from an ordinary weapon is expected from a silent weapon by its creators, but only in its own manner of functioning. It shoots situations instead of bullets, propelled by data processing instead of chemical reaction or explosion, originating from bits of data instead of grains of gunpowder, from a computer instead of a gun, operated by a computer programmer instead of a marksman, under the orders of a banking magnate instead of a military general. It makes no obvious explosive noises, causes no obvious physical or mental injuries, and does not obviously interfere with anyone's daily social life. Yet it makes an unmistakable noise, causes unmistakable physical and mental damage, and unmistakably interferes with the daily social life, i.e., unmistakable to a trained observer, one who knows what to look for. The public cannot comprehend this weapon, and therefore cannot believe that they are being attacked and subdued by a weapon. They might instinctively feel that something is wrong, but that is because of the technical nature of the silent weapon. They cannot express their feeling in a rational way or handle the problem with intelligence or maturity. Therefore, they do not know how to cry for help and do not know how to associate with others to defend themselves against it. When a silent weapon is applied gradually, the public adapts to its presence and learns to tolerate its encroachment on their lives until the pressure, psychological via economic, becomes too great and they crack up. Therefore, the silent weapon is a type of biological warfare. It attacks the vitality, options, and mobilities of the individuals of a society by knowing, understanding, manipulating, and attacking their sources of natural and social energy, and their physical, mental, and emotional strengths and weaknesses. Alright, so now we go into the theoretical introduction, which starts with a quote from one of the people that helped come up with the theories in this, Meyer Amschel Rothschild, which everybody's probably heard this one, which is give me control over a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws. Today's silent weapons technology is an outgrowth of a simple idea discovered, succinctly expressed, and effectively applied by the quoted Mr. Meyer Amschel Rothschilds. Mr. Rothschild discovers the missing passive component of economic theory known as economic inductance. He, of course, did not think of his discovery in these 20th century terms, and to be sure, mathematical analysis had to wait for the Second Industrial Revolution, the rise of the theory of mechanics and electronics, and finally the invention of the electron computer before it could be applied effectively in the control of the world economy. So we go to general energy concepts. In the study of energy systems, there always appears three elementary concepts. These are potential energy, kinetic energy, and energy dissipation. And corresponding to these concepts, there are three idealized, essentially pure physical counterparts called passive components. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomena of potential energy is associated with a physical property called elasticity or stiffness, and can be represented by a stretched spring. In electronic science, potential energy is stored in a capacitor instead of a spring. This property is called capacitance instead of elasticity or stiffness. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomena of kinetic energy is associated with a physical property called inertia or mass, and can be represented by a mass or a flywheel in a motion. In electronic science, kinetic energy is stored in an inductor in a magnetic field instead of mass. This property is called inductance instead of inertia. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomena of energy dissipation is associated with a physical property called friction or resistance, and can be in the science of physical mechanics, the phenomena of energy dissipation is associated with a physical property called friction or resistance, and can be represented by a dash pot or other device which converts energy into heat. In electronic science, the dissipation of energy is performed by an element called either a resistor or a conductor, the term resistor being the one generally used to describe the more ideal device. Employed to convey electric energy efficiently from one location to another. Now, see, that's a little error. The term is conductor is being the one that is generally used to describe a more ideal device. The property of a resistance or conductor is measured as either resistance or conductance reciprocals. In economics, these three energy concepts are associated with economic capacitance, which is capital, money, stock, inventory, investments in buildings and durables. Economic conductance is goods, or the production flow of coefficients. Economic inductance is services, the influence of the population on industry on output. All of the mathematical theory developed in the study of one energy system, mechanics, electronics, etc., can be immediately applied in the study of any other energy system, i.e., economics. Mr. Rothschild's energy discovery. What Mr. Rothschild had discovered was the basic principle of power, influence, and control over people as applied to economics. That principle is, when you assume the appearance of power, people soon give it to you. Mr. Rothschild had discovered that currency or deposit loan accounts had the required appearance of power that could be used to induce people, inductance with people corresponding to a magnetic field, into surrendering their real wealth in exchange for a promise of greater wealth instead of real compensation. They would put up real collateral in exchange for a loan of promissory notes. Mr. Rothschild found that he could issue more notes than he had backing for, so long as he had someone's stock of gold as a persuader to show his customers. Mr. Rothschild loaned his promissory notes to individuals and to governments. These would create overconfidence. Then he would make money scarce, tighten control of the system, and collect the collateral through the obligation of the contracts. This cycle was then repeated. These pressures could be used to ignite a war. Then he would control the availability of currency to determine who would win the war. That government which agreed to give him control of its economic system got his financial support. Collection of debts was guaranteed by economic aid to the enemy of the debtor. The profit derived from this economic methodology made Mr. Rothschild all the more able to expand his wealth. He found that the public greed would allow currency to be printed by government order beyond its limits, inflation of backing in precious metal, or the production of goods and services. Apparent capital as a paper inductor. In this structure, credit, presented as a pure element called currency, has the appearance of capital, but is in effect negative capital. Hence, it has the appearance of service, but is in fact indebtedness or debt. It is therefore an economic inductance instead of an economic capacitance. Capacitance. Basically, what's that to say is it's sucking energy rather than producing energy. So that's more or less the gist of it. It's using energy and converting it to heat rather than producing energy that can be used to produce work. Alright. And if balanced in no other way, will be balanced by the negation of population, war, genocide. The total goods and services represent real capital called the gross national product, and currency may be printed up to this level and still represent economic capacitance. But currently printed... Alright. If balanced in no other way, will be balanced by the negation of population, war, genocide. The total goods and services represent real capital called the gross national product, and currency may be printed up to this level and still represent economic capacitance, which is meaning energy that can be used to produce work. But currency printed beyond this level is subtractive, represents the introduction of economic inductance, and constitutes notes of indebtedness. War is therefore the balancing of the system by killing the true creditors, the public which we have taught to exchange true value for inflated currency, and falling back on whatever is left of the resources of nature and regeneration of those resources. Mr. Rothschild has discovered that currency gave him the power to rearrange the economic structure to his own advantage, to shift economic inductance to the breakthrough. The aviation field provided the greatest evolution in economic engineering by way of the mathematical theory of shock testing. In this process, a projectile is fired from an airframe on the ground, and the impulse of the recoil is monitored by vibration transducers connected to the airframe and wired to chart recorders. By echoes or reflections of the recoil impulse in the airframe, it is possible to discover critical vibrations in the structure of the airframe, which either vibrations of the engine or aeolian vibrations of the wings or a combination of the two might reinforce, resulting in a resonant self-destruction of the airframe in flight as an aircraft. From the standpoint of engineering, this means that the strengths and weaknesses of the structure of the airframe in terms of vibrational energy can be discovered and manipulated. The application in economics is to use this method of airframe shock testing in economic engineering. The prices of commodities are shocked, and the public consumer reaction is monitored. The resulting echoes of the economic shock are interpreted theoretically by computers, and the psychoeconomic structure of the economy is thus discovered. It is by this process that partial, differential, or indifference matrices are discovered that define the family household and make possible its evaluation as an economic industry. Then the response of the household to future shocks can be predicted and manipulated, and society becomes a well-regulated animal with its reins under the control of a sophisticated computer-regulated social energy bookkeeping system. Eventually, every individual element of the structure comes under computer control through a knowledge of personal preferences, such knowledge guaranteed by computer association of consumer preferences. Universal Product Code, UPC, zebra stripe pricing codes on packages. Can you say Google? And Microsoft? Yeah, AI, etc., etc., etc. With identified consumers, identified via association with the use of a credit card and later a permanent tattooed body number invisible under normal ambient illumination. Summary. Economics is only a social extension of a natural energy system. It also has its three passive components. Because of the distribution of wealth and the lack of communication and lack of data, this field has been the last energy field for which a knowledge of these three passive components has been developed. Since energy is the key to all activity on the face of the earth, it follows that in order to attain a monopoly of energy, raw materials, goods, and services, and to establish a world system of slave labor, it is necessary to have a first strike capability in the field of economics. In order to maintain our position, it is necessary that we have absolutely first knowledge of the science of control over all economic factors and the first experience at engineering the world economy. In order to achieve such sovereignty, we must at least achieve this one end, that the public will not make either the logical or mathematical connection between economics and the other energy sciences, or learn to apply such knowledge. This is becoming increasingly difficult to control because more and more businesses are making demands upon their computer programmers to create and apply mathematical models for the management of those businesses. It is only a matter of time before the new breed of private programmer economists will catch on to the far-reaching implications of the work begun at Harvard in 1948. The speed with which they can communicate their warning to the public will largely depend upon how effective we have been at controlling the media, subverting education, and keeping the public distracted. Energy science has a first objective to describe the complex way in which any given unit of resources is used to satisfy some economic want. The Leontief matrix. The first objective, when it is extended to get the most product from the least or limited resources, it compromises. Let's try that again. Economics as a social energy science has a first objective, the description of the complex way in which any given unit of resources is used to satisfy some economic want. This first objective, when it is extended to get the most product from the least or limited resources, comprises that objective of general military and industrial logistics known as operations research. See Simplex method of linear programming. The Harvard Economic Research Project was an extension of World War II operations research. Its purpose was to discover the science of controlling an economy. At first the American economy and then the world economy. It was felt that with sufficient mathematical foundation and data, it would be nearly as easy to predict and control the trend of an economy as to predict and control the trajectory of its projectile. Such has proven to be the case. Moreover, the economy has been transformed into a guided missile right on target. The immediate aim of the Harvard project was to discover the economic structure, what forces change that structure, how the behavior of the structure can be predicted, and how it can be manipulated. What was needed was a well-organized knowledge of the mathematical structures and interrelationships of investment, production, distribution, and consumption. To make a short story of it all, it was discovered that an economy obeyed the same laws as electricity, and that all of the mathematical theory and practical and computer know-how developed for an electronic field could be directly applied in the study of economics. This discovery was not openly declared, and its more subtle implications were and are kept a closely guarded secret. For example, that in an economic model, human life is measured in dollars, and that the electric spark generated when opening a switch connected to an active inductor is mathematically analogous to the initiation of war. The greatest hurdle which theoretical economists face was the accurate description of the household as an industry. This is a challenge because consumer purchases are a matter of choice, which in turn is influenced by income, price, and other economic factors. The hurdle was cleared in an indirect and statistically approximate way by an application of shock testing to determine the current characteristics, called current technical coefficients, of a household industry. Finally, because because problems in theoretical electronics can be translated very easily into problems of theoretical electronics, and the solution translated back again, it follows that. So basically what it boils down to is sooner or later, once you increase inflation enough, people get upset, and that leads to war. Now they say that other alternatives to war as a way to balance it out are open-ended social welfare programs or an enormous but fruitful open-ended space program. And then we'll start reading again. The problem with stabilizing the economic system is that there is too much demand on account of 1, too much greed, and 2, too much population. This creates excessive inductance, which can only be balanced with economic capacitance. What that's trying to say is basically it produces a need, a level of demand that has to be supplied with like real goods and services. The social welfare program is nothing more than an open-ended credit balance system which creates a false capital industry to give non-productive people a roof over their heads and food in their stomachs. This can be useful, however, because the recipients become state property in return for the gift, a standing army for the elite, for he who pays the piper picks the tune. Those who get hooked on the economic drug must go to the elite for a fix. In this, the method of inducing large amounts of stabilizing capacitance is by borrowing on the future credit of the world. This is the fourth law of motion, onset, and consists of performing an action and leaving the system before the reflected reaction returns to the point of action, a delayed reaction. The means of surviving the reaction is by changing the system before the reaction can return. By this means, politicians become more popular in their own time and the public pays later. In fact, the measure of such a politician is the delay time. The same thing is achieved by a government by printing money beyond the limit of gross national product and the economic process called inflation. This puts a large quantity of money into the hands of the public and maintains a balance against their greed, creates a false self-confidence in them, and for a while stays the wolf from the door. They must eventually resort to war to balance the account, because war ultimately is merely the act of destroying the creditor, and the politicians are the publicly hired hitmen that justify the act to keep the responsibility and blood off the public conscience. If the people really cared about their fellow men, they would control their appetites so they would not have to operate on our credit or welfare social system, which steals from the worker to satisfy the bum. Since most of the general public will not exercise restraint, there are only two alternatives to reduce the economic inductance of the system. Let the populace bludgeon each other to death in war, which will only result in total destruction of the living earth. Take control of the world by use of economic silent weapons in the form of quiet warfare, and reduce the economic inductance of the world to a safe level by a process of benevolence, slavery, and genocide. Oh, you gotta love that, huh? The later option has been taken as the obviously better option. So their goal in this instance, they're really not per se wanting a war so much as benevolent slavery and genocide. At this point, it should be crystal clear to the reader why absolute secrecy about the silent weapons is necessary. The general public refuses to improve its own mentality and its faith in its fellow man. It has become a herd of proliferating barbarians and, so to speak, a blight upon the face of the earth. They do not care enough about economic science to learn why they have not been able to avoid war despite religious morality and their religious or self-gratifying refusal to deal with earthly problems renders the solution of the earthly problem unreachable to them. It is left for those few who are truly willing to think and survive as the fittest to survive to solve the problem for themselves. Aspects of economic shock testing, and we really don't need to go into that. You know, you feel that every time you go in and try to buy some food, right? Alright, so by shock testing, it is found that there is a direct relationship between the availability of money flowing in an economy and the real psychological outlook and response of masses of people dependent upon that availability. For example, there is a measurable quantitative relationship between the price of gasoline and the probability that a person would experience a headache, feel a need to watch a violent movie, smoke a cigarette, or go to a tavern for a mug of beer. It is most interesting that by observing and measuring the economic models by which the public tries to run from their problems and escape from reality, and by applying the mathematical theory of operations research, it is possible to program computers to predict the most probable combination of created events and shocks which will bring about a complete control and subjugation of the public through a subversion of the public economy. Let's go through that one more time, and let's kind of keep AI in mind here, alright? So, it is possible to program computers to predict the most probable combination of created events and shocks, which will bring about a complete control and subjugation of the public through a subversion of the public economy. Just so you know. Alright, so then it goes into more math on the shock testing. And again, you know, if you want to dig through the math and you're familiar with you have to be pretty much familiar with motor theory, electronic theory, economics, and calculus, and yeah, that's about it. Algebra, of course. Yeah, so if you're familiar with all of that, and you know, if you have a little bit of esoteric teachings behind that, the higher sciences, then the math gets really interesting. All right, so I will of course have a link for this posted. Anyway, all right, so bye. Let's skip all the math for right now. This is the result into which we substitute to get a set of conditions of prices of commodities, bad news on TV, which will deliver a collapse of public morale ripe for takeover. Once the economic price and sales coefficients are determined, they may be translated into the technical supply and demand coefficients. Shock testing of a given commodity is then repeated to get the time rate of change of these technical coefficients. Alright, now we talk about economic amplifiers. Economic amplifiers are the active components of economic engineering. The basic characteristic of any amplifier, mechanical, electrical, or economic, is that it receives an input control signal and delivers energy from an independent energy source to a specified output terminal in a predictable relationship to that input control signal. The simplest form of an economic amplifier is a device called advertising. If a person is spoken to by a TV advertiser as if he were a 12-year-old, then due to suggestibility, he will, with a certain probability, respond or react to that suggestion with the uncritical response of a 12-year-old, and will reach into his economic reservoir and deliver its energy to buy that product on impulse when he passes it in the store. An economic amplifier may have several inputs and outputs. Its response might be instantaneous or delayed. Its circuit symbol might be the rotary switch if its options are exclusive, qualitative, go or no go, or it might have its parametric input-output relationship specified by a matrix with internal energy sources represented. Whatever its form might be, its purpose is to govern the flow of energy from a source to an output, synced in direct relationship to an input control signal. For this reason, it is called an active circuit element or component. Economic amplifiers fall into classes called strategies, and in comparison with electronic amplifiers, the specific internal functions of an economic amplifier are called logistical instead of electrical. Therefore, economic amplifiers not only deliver power gain, but also in effect are used to cause changes in the economic circuitry. In the design of an economic amplifier, we must have some idea of at least 5 functions, which are the available input signals, the desired output control objectives, the strategic objective, the available economic power sources, the logistical options. The process of defining and evaluating these factors and incorporating the economic amplifier into an economic system has been popularly called game theory. They teach it in business. The design of an economic amplifier begins with a specification of the power level of the output, which can range from personal to national. The second condition is accuracy of response. How accurately the output action is a function of the input commands. High gain combined with strong feedback helps to deliver the required precision. Most of the error will be in the input data signal. Personal input data tends to be specified, while national input data tends to be statistical. For the list of inputs, the questions necessary to be answered are what, where, why, when, how, and who. The general sources of information include telephone taps, analysis of garbage, surveillance, behavior of children in school, free phones, Google, AI. Oh yeah, and most of your larger cities have these boxes that they keep in their cars that they drive around with that gather up all your cell phone signals because those are public property, including text. So, standard of living by food, shelter, clothing, transportation. They need to maintain records of your social contacts through the telephone, social media. I just added that in. They didn't have that back in 48, did they? Or 54, pardon me, or 79 when this was found. Either way, they didn't have it back then. Telephone, itemized records of calls, family, marriage certificates, birth certificates, friends, associates, memberships in organizations, political affiliation. The way to keep track of that is also through the personal paper trail, or in this day and age, of course, network usage. Personal buying habits, consumer preferences, checking accounts, credit card purchases, assets, checking accounts, saving accounts, real estate, business, automobile, safety deposits, stock market, creditors, enemies, loans, welfare, social security, surplus food, doles, grants, subsidies. Principles of deploy the citizen will almost always make the collection of information easy if he can operate on the free sandwich principle of eat now and pay later. Another access for data and manipulation is your government sources, be it intimidation, Internal Revenue Service, OSHA, Census, etc. Surveillance of U.S. mail. Alright, they can basically, programming is considered forming your habit patterns using those data inputs. Strengths and weaknesses, activities, sports, hobbies, legal, hospital records, psychiatric records, suggestibility or hypnosis, methods of coping of adaptability, consumption of alcohol, consumption of drugs, entertainment, religion, and other methods of escaping from reality. How much you pay on your bills, if you pay on time, your political sensitivity, your beliefs, your contacts, your strengths, your weaknesses, your legal inputs, your ability to your behavior control, excuses for investigation, search, arrest, or employment of force to modify behavior, court records, police records, driving records, reports made to the police, insurance information, anti-establishment acquaintances. And then there's the national input information, business sources, prices, commodity sales, investments, banks, miscellaneous sources, polls, surveys, publications, telephone records, energy and utility purchases. All right. So you take all that information and you sift it down and you weaponize it, and you end up with an output that creates controlled situations. Manipulation of the economy and hence society, control by control of compensation and income. The sequence you do this in is first you allocate opportunities, then you destroy the opportunities. Then you take control of the economic environment. Then you control the availability of raw materials. You begin to control the capital, the bank rates, and the inflation of the currency. By controlling the inflation of the currency, you gain control and possession of property, which allows you to control industrial capacity. Once you have control of manufacturing, you can control the availability of goods and commodities, which means you can control the price of those commodities. And you can control the services and the labor force by the payment and control payments to government officials, and thus gain control of legal functions. This allows you to control all of the personal data files. It also allows you to control advertising, media content, the material available for TV. It allows you to control what news they get, so you can disengage attention from real issues, control their emotions, create disorder, chaos, insanity. Then you become more probing tax form. You use that money to control the surveillance, increase your storage of information. They don't put it in here, but now that we got AI, they can actually sort through this massive sheath of information they're gathering. Develops a psychological analysis and profiles of each individual, controls the legal functions, controls sociological factors, controls health options, preys on weaknesses, cripples strengths, leeches wealth and substance. So that's straight up that's the tactics to get to their overall strategy. That's where they make a mistake here. If you know anything about tactics and strategy, what they listed there was strategies, or tactics, not strategies. They never list their overall and true strategy in this, but we'll go into that eventually. All right, table of strategies. Do this. Keep the public ignorant to get less public organization. Maintain access to control points for feedback, which allows you to monitor the reaction. Create preoccupation to lower defense. Attack the family unit to control the education of the young. Give less cash and more credit for more self-indulgence and to make it easier to gather data. Attack the privacy of the church. Destroy faith in this sort of government. Create social conformity. Computer programming simplicity. Minimize the tax protest. For maximize economic data and minimum enforcement problems. Stabilize the consent, it makes it simpler. Tighten control of variables so that there's greater predictability. Establish boundary conditions, also to make it easier. Proper timing so that there's less margin for error. Cement and maximize control so there is a minimum resistance. Then collapse the currency to destroy the faith of the American people in each other. Diversion, the primary strategy. Experience has proven that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of the basic system principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no real importance on the other hand. This is achieved by disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design, and economics, and discouraging technical creativity. engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities by unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, mental and emotional rape by way of a constant barrage of sex, violence, and wars in the media, especially in the TV and newspapers, and now the internet, right? Giving them what they desire in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need, spirituality, right? Rewriting history and law and subjecting the public to this creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. These preclude their interest in and discovery of the silent weapons of social automation technology. The general rule is that there is profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer solutions. Diversion summary, media. Keep the adult public attention diverted away from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. Schools. Keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, and real history. Entertainment. Keep the public entertainment below a 6th grade level. Work. Keep the public busy with no time to think. Back on the farm with the other animals. Consent. The primary victory. A silent weapon operates upon data obtained from a docile public by a legal but not always lawful force. Much information is made available to silent weapon systems programmers through the Internal Revenue Service and Google, OpenAI. See studies in the structure of the American economy for an IRS source list. Oh yeah, by the way, yeah, Facebook is in on this too. Yeah, that he's knee deep in this. So he'll be here to tell you yet another doom and gloom approaching from directions that you didn't even know there were directions, which is what the news does right now. Which, of course, you remember if you were there for earlier, I was reading about that specifically by design. So, I highly recommend, really limiting yourself to the amount of official and approved media sources that you expose yourself to if you really want to be able to break free of slavery, because that's what they're talking about here. And in the next episode, I'm gonna kind of give you a hint as to exactly how significant the consequences and how far-reaching this particular document and the strategies and tactics behind it actually are. Because this is really just the tip of the iceberg, and like I say, it's a very deep, dark rabbit hole, and it can crush your spirit if you let it. And fortunately for you all, I've already been through all that part of it, and I've actually applied a pretty strong spirituality and a stubborn streak of my own blood to try to figure a way through this. So I'm not taking you down this rabbit hole without giving you a little bit of hope along the way, because there is hope. It's like, we'll get to that when we get to it, but they're not gods, and they're not undefeatable. Now, killing them doesn't do no good, but we'll go into that later. But they can be defeated without force of arms. This I know for a fact. So basically, it's not necessary to go to war. That's their game. Gandhi is a pretty good example, and Buddha is another prime example of people who knew what it was really about, and what a true warrior or a true movement for change is. Because basically they taught us to hate long ago. We'll cover that in the next episode here. But that's not natural. It's something they taught us. Cain and Abel was a learned behavior, and since then it's been pretty screwed up. But it's like, it's not without hope. And everybody that in the in the community, of archaeologists, the esoteric community. There's a lot of people that wish they could tell you basically a lot of what I'm gonna be revealing in this episode and future episodes, and they simply can't because they have too much to lose. So you can't hold that against them. There are those that do, and pretty much they find themselves, they pay the price. So I mean, believe me, in order for me to sit and tell you what I'm going to be telling you, it's like that makes enemies, and those enemies have all the resources in the world, but screw them. Anyway, so where are we? We were at all right, amplification of energy sources. The next step in the process of designing an economic amplifier is discovering the energy sources. The energy sources which support any primitive economic system are, of course, a supply of raw materials and the consent of the people to labor and consequently assume a certain rank, position, level, or class in the social structure, i.e., to provide labor at various levels in the pecking order. Each class, in guaranteeing its own level of income, controls the class immediately below it, hence preserves the class structure. This provides stability and security, but also government from the top. As time goes on and communication and education improve, the lower class elements of the social labor structure become knowledgeable and envious of the good things that the upper class members have. They also begin to attain a knowledge of energy systems and the ability to enforce their rise through the class structure. This threatens the sovereignty of the elite. If this rise of the lower classes can be postponed long enough, the elite can achieve energy dominance, and labor by consent no longer will hold a position of an essential energy source, meaning will be slaves. Until such energy dominance is absolutely established, the consent of people to labor and let others handle their affairs must be taken into consideration, since failure to do so could cause the people to interfere in the final transfer of energy sources to the control of the elite. We'll eventually have to go into precisely what that's all about, because, they're not dragons. They're not doing this so they can sit upon it and roll in their piles of gold here. The truth about money is it's only it's a means to an end. It's a source of energy. If you see it as energy, then you need that energy for something. Energy that is not being utilized is no longer energy. So you see what I'm saying? It is essential to recognize that at this time, public consent is still an essential key to the release of energy in the process of economic amplification. Therefore, consent as an energy release mechanism will now be considered. Logistics. The successful application of a strategy requires a careful study of inputs, outputs, the strategy connecting the inputs and the outputs, and the available energy sources to fuel the strategy. This study is called logistics. A logistical problem is studied at the elementary level first, and then levels of greater complexity are studied as a synthesis of elementary factors. This means that a given system is analyzed, broken down into its subsystems, and these in turn are analyzed until by this process one arrives at the logistical atom, the individual. This is where the process of synthesis properly begins, at the time of birth of the individual. From the time a person leaves its mother's womb, its every effort is directed towards building, maintaining, and withdrawing into artificial wombs various sorts of substitute protective devices or shells. The objective of these artificial wombs is to provide a stable environment for both stable and unstable activity, to provide a shelter for the evolutionary process of growth and maturity, survival, to provide security for freedom, and to provide defensive protection for offensive activity. This is equally true of both the general public and the elite. However, there is a definite difference in the way each of these classes go about the solution of problems. The political structure of a nation, dependency. The primary reason why the individual citizens of a country create a political structure is a subconscious wish or desire to perpetuate their own dependency relationship of childhood. Simply put, they want a human god to eliminate all risk from their life, pat them on the head, kiss their bruises, put a chicken on every dinner table, clothe their bodies, tuck them into bed at night, and tell them everything will be all right when they wake up in the morning. This public demand is incredible, so the human god, the politician, meets the incredibility with the incredibility by promising the world and delivering nothing. So who is the bigger liar, the public or the godfather? This public behavior is surrender born of fear, laziness, and expediency. It is the basis of the welfare state as a strategic weapon useful against a disgusting public. Action offense. Most people want to be able to subdue and or kill other human beings which disturb their daily lives, but they do not want to have to cope with the moral and religious issues which such an overt act on their part might raise. Therefore, they assign the dirty work to others, including their own children, so as to keep the blood off their hands. They rave about the humane treatment of animals and then sit down to a delicious hamburger from a whitewashed slaughterhouse down the street and out of sight. But even more hypocritical, they pay taxes to finance a professional association of hitmen collectively called politicians and then complain about corruption in government. Responsibility. Again, most people want to be free to do the things that they are afraid to fail. The fear of failure is manifested in irresponsibility and especially in delegating those personal responsibilities to others where success is uncertain or carries possible or created liabilities, i.e. legal issues, which the person is not prepared to accept. They want authority, root word author, but they will not accept responsibility or liability, so they hire politicians to face reality for them. Now, here's an important thing to keep in mind, because the whole concept of failure is a myth. There's no damn such thing as failure. There's only results. You know, it's like if these results, basically, all you have to do to make them valuable is see where you could have acted differently to create different results. It's as simple as that. So why fear failure since there's no such thing? You can't possibly fear making mistakes because the first thing, part of the learning process is making your mistakes. So they're basically creating the concept of failure and then weaponizing that against us in order to create so much fear that we become locked into their little strategy here. And again, the repercussions of this go a lot further than you might think. Alright, so summary. The people hire the politicians so the people can obtain security without managing it, obtain action without thinking about it, inflict theft, injury, and death upon others without having to contemplate either life or death, avoid responsibility for their own intentions, obtain the benefits of reality and science without exerting themselves in the discipline of facing or learning either of these two things. They give the politicians the power to create and manage a war machine to provide for the survival of the nation, prevent encroachment of anything upon the nation, destroy the enemy who threatens the nation, destroy those citizens of their own country who do not conform for the sake of the stability of the nations. Politicians hold many quasi-military jobs, the lowest being the police, which are soldiers, the attorneys and CPAs next, who are spies and licensed saboteurs, and the judges who shout orders and run the closed union military shop for whatever the market will bear. The generals are industrialists. The presidential level of commander-in-chief is shared by the international bankers. The people know that they have created this farce and financed it with their own taxes, which is consent, but they would rather knuckle under than be a hypocrite. Thus, a nation becomes divided into two distinct parts, a docile sub-nation, great silent majority, and a political sub-nation. The political sub-nation remains attached to the docile sub-nation, tolerates it, and leeches its substance until it grows strong enough to detach itself and then devour its parent. System analysis. In order to make meaningful computerized economic decisions about war, the primary economic flywheel, it is necessary to assign concrete logistical values to each element of the war structure, personnel and material alike. This process begins with a clear and candid description of the subsystem of such a structure, the draft. Few efforts of human behavior modification are more remarkable or more effective than that of the socio-military institution known as the draft. A primary purpose of the draft or other such institution is to instill by intimidation in the young males of a society the uncritical conviction that the government is omnipotent. He is soon taught that a prayer is slow to reverse what a bullet can do in an instant. Thus, a man trained in a religious environment for 18 years of his life can, by this instrument of the government, be broken down, purged of his fantasies and delusions in a matter of mere months. Once that conviction is instilled, all else becomes easy to instill. Even more interesting is the process by which a young man's parents, who purportedly love him, can be induced to send him off to war to his death. Although the scope of this work will not allow this matter to be expanded in full detail, nevertheless, a course overview will be possible and can serve to reveal those factors which must be included in some numerical form in a computer analysis of social and war systems. We begin with a tentative definition of the draft. The draft is an institution of compulsory collective sacrifice and slavery devised by the middle-aged and elderly for the purpose of pressing the young into doing the public dirty work. It further serves to make the youth as guilty as the elders, thus making criticism of the elders by the youth less likely generational stabilizer. It is marketed and sold to the public under the label of patriotic service. Once a candid economic definition of the draft is achieved, that definition is used to outline the boundaries of a structure called the human value system, which in turn is translated into the terms of game theory. The value of such a slave laborer is given in a table of human values, a table broken down into categories by intellect, experience, post-service, job demand, etc. Some of these categories are ordinary and can be tentatively evaluated in terms of the value of certain jobs for which a known fee exists. Some jobs are harder to value because they are unique to the demands of social subversion. For an extreme example, the value of a mother's instruction to her daughter, causing that daughter to put certain behavioral demands upon a future husband 10 or 15 years hence, thus suppressing his resistance to a perversion of a government, making it easier for a banking cartel to buy the state of New York in, say, 20 years. Such a problem leans heavily upon the observation and data of wartime espionage and the many types of psychological testing. But crude mathematical algorithms can be devised, if not to predict, at least to predetermine these events with maximum certainty. What does not exist by natural cooperation is thus enhanced by calculated compulsion. Human beings are machines, levers which may be grasped and turned, and there is little real difference between automating a society and automating a shoe factory. These derived values are variable. It is necessary to use a current table of human values for computer analysis. These values are given in true measure rather than US dollars, since the labor later is unstable, being presently inflated beyond the production of national goods and services so as to give the economy a false kinetic energy. The silver value is stable. It is being possible to buy the same amount with a gram of silver today, blah, 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 blah. All right, enforcement, factor 1. As in every social system approach, stability is achieved only by understanding and accounting for human nature, action-reaction patterns. A failure to do so can be, and usually is, disastrous. As in other human social schemes, one form or another of intimidation or incentive is essential to the success of the draft, the carrot and the stick, right? Physical principles of action and reaction must be applied to both internal and external subsystems. To secure the draft, individual brainwashing and programming, both the family unit and the peer group, must be engaged and brought under control. Factor 2, the father. The man of the household must be housebroken to ensure that Junior will grow up with the right social training and attitudes. The advertising media are engaged to see that father-to-be is pussy whipped before or by the time he is married. He is taught that he either conforms to the social knots cut out for him, or his sex life will be hobbled, and his tender companionship will be zero. He is made to see that women demand security more than logical, principled, or honorable behavior. By the time his son must go to war, father, with the jelly for a backbone, will slam a gun into Junior's hand before father will risk the censure of his peers or make a hypocrite of himself by crossing the investment he has in his own personal opinion or self-esteem. Junior will go to war or father will be embarrassed, so Junior will go to war, the true purpose notwithstanding. Factor 3. Mom. The female element of human society is ruled by emotion first and logic second. In the battle between logic and imagination, imagination always wins. Fantasy prevails. Maternal instinct dominates so that the child comes first and the future comes second. A woman with a newborn baby is too starry-eyed to see a wealthy man's cannon fodder or a cheap source of slave labor. A woman must, however, be conditioned to accept the transition to that reality when it comes, or preferably sooner. As the transition becomes more difficult to manage, the family unit must be carefully disintegrated, and state-controlled public education and state-operated child care centers must become more common and legally enforced so as to begin the detachment of the child from the mother and the father at an earlier age. Inoculation of behavioral drugs, Ritalin for example, can speed the transition for the child. Mandatory. Caution. A woman's impulsive anger can override her fear. An irate woman's power must never be underestimated, and her power over a pussy-whipped husband must likewise never be underestimated. It got the women the vote in 1920. Factor 4. Junior. The emotional pressure for self-preservation during the time of war and the self-serving attitude of the common herd that have an opinion to avoid the battlefield, or have an option to avoid the battlefield, if Junior can be persuaded to go in their stead, is all of the pressure finally necessary to propel Johnny off to war. Their quiet blackmailings of him are the threats: no sacrifice, no friends, no glory, no pussy. Factor 5. Sister. And what about Junior's sister? She is given all the good things of life by her father and taught to expect the same from her future husband regardless of the price. Factor 6. Cattle. Those who will not use their brains are no better off than those who have no brains. And so this mindless school of jellyfish, father, mother, son, and daughter, become useful beasts of burden or trainers of the same. This concludes what was found of this document.